Most of us live mostly online now, so if you're like me, you've been reflecting on what we miss in our classes and libraries. Books that were once physical now live on screens, but research must continue. In periodical studies, this has long been the case. A run of Gentleman's Magazine thrown out or sold frees up shelf space for materials not yet widely available online. But as other scholars have rightly pointed out, dismembered article databases obscure the editing of individual volumes, deliberate or accidental juxtapositions, and materials judged by some distant scanning unit as not relevant, such as advertisements, editorials, indices, and other so-called paratext. This forgets that yesterday's paratext has often become today's text. Yet, even those who brave the reading room's enclosed indoor space may miss the full context of an object they study. Begun in 1665, the Philosophical Transactions almost exclusively survives in bound volumes that cover a year or more. These volumes generally have a collective title page, a dedication, and an index. Thus, the standard bibliographies, with the important exception of Nelson and Seccombe's MLA-sponsored short title catalog, treat these volumes as single bibliographical issues, a complete planned unit. This misstates their history, obscures evidence, and has created a great deal of confusion when using bad digital copies. The volumes are collected issues or nonce editions, a term that Fredson Bowers accepts only begrudgingly in his principles, underscoring the form's marginal status even then. Sir W. W. Gregg knew about these confections of previously issued units under a collected title page because they were used for selling old plays, but these were necessarily made from reprints of popular plays or unsold copies of unpopular plays. Our modern focus on first and best editions by single authors with title pages that are more or less right means that these woollier nonce editions are comparatively less familiar. That we now say issues of journals makes the situation worse. Do we say an issue was issued? How do we know which issue we mean? The relative unfamiliarity of this type of publishing unit goes hand in hand with the cobbled together terminology. No wonder that a volume of the Philosophical Transactions begins to seem to be an issue in two senses. To clarify things today, I'll use the older term, number, to refer to each numbered and issued unit. But things remain a little sticky because volume 47, printed by that writer and printer of great big novels, Samuel Richardson, was issued as one great big volume, not a nonce edition. This, however, marks a change for the Philosophical Transactions. On 15 February 1752, George Parker, 2nd Earl of Macclesfield, who was then president of the Royal Society, proposed appointing a committee to select from the papers read before the Society to be included in a yearly volume of Transactions, paid for by the dues of members and by the 25% margin of profit for those sold to non-members. That is, the Society selected papers, paid to print the journal, and sold back issues. An innovative approach, to be sure, for a learned journal at that time, but certainly very familiar to members of EC ASECS. Prior to this, the individual secretaries ran the journal more like a bake sale. They prepared copy for approval, which they sold or gave to the printer for the Society, who sold copies at their shop, but gave the secretary discounted copies to sell at full price to members. Any profit supplemented the honor and meager stipend that a busy secretary might get. In Oldenburg's case, it probably paid for a portion of his postage, so the secretary put in it what would sell, and the printer took on the capital cost of paper and ink and labor. Consequently, at first, the Philosophical Transactions were not issued in great big volumes, but side-stitched numbers. At the end of a year, the printer could print a collective title page, dedication, introduction, and index to affix to volumes assembled from unsold issues, which they could then sell as something new. The early organization into volumes resulted from unsold stock, not some plan. But later volumes were made uniform with these ad hoc volumes, so it's easy to think they were issued whole if you don't look too closely. This one fact corrects a number of interpretive and bibliographical errors that I don't have time to fully go into today, but which you can impress your friends with if you go to the right parties. Cram type, soiling, how plates are folded, manuscript annotations, creasing, and missing sections all become much clearer with this new taxonomy. That is, after 1752, the Philosophical Transactions is issued in planned volumes. Before then, in planned numbers collected into ad hoc volumes, no matter what the index or dedication says. On your screen, number 20 of the Philosophical Transactions exists in two wholly separate editions with different imprints. Moses Pitt's comes first since it has uncorrected errata, and John Martin's omits the errata since he made the corrections. But why do we have two editions at all? The answer is clear enough if you look carefully. John Martin, the secretary's regular printer, which it says right in the imprint, recovered from the Great Fire of 1666 more slowly than Pitt. Look at the dates, 17 December 1666. So when he rebuilt, he reprinted the number for which he was the seller, both for immediate sale and probably to include in the common complete volume later on. Knowing this, we can look at number 17, dated 9 September 1666, 3 days after the fire ended. Martin is in the imprint of all copies I've seen, but the first signature marks a difference in the bibliographical fingerprints. The exact techniques vary, but each kind of bibliographical fingerprint looks at the letters immediately above the signature marks. Here, the letter R in the middle of the screen, but the bottom of the first page of the number. The left, 2R1, is underneath an R, an E, and a space. The right, just an E. So the left STCN fingerprint is 2R1, RE $. The right is just R1E. They differ, so maybe this is a hidden edition with a false imprint? Unscrupulous pirates taking advantage of the fire? It turns out, no. Optical collation, overlaying one type page over another to check alignment, shows these to be the same setting of type, just with two states of the first signature's signing. This resolves a dating issue. The date in the heading refers to the coverage, but it must have been completed earlier, possibly even before 2 September, since Martin lost most of his stock in the fire in St. Paul's. Again, this is obvious enough if you know how these were issued. But there are hidden editions that we can detect. On screen now is an excerpt of my bibliographical description, which is the easiest place to see the differences, which are otherwise too spread out to be very clear. The first two lines show variation in the fingerprints, like in number 17, but my transcription additionally reveals different swash characters, spacing, and rules that pervade the whole number. Just one or two differences might indicate a state, but this many indicates a new edition. I confirmed with optical collation. But why would Martin set it twice? In 1666, Henry Oldenburg, who was then secretary and therefore superintendent and beneficiary of any profits from the Philosophical Transactions, writes that he cannot find enough copies of the Philosophical Transactions to satisfy the demand. So we know that a bookseller resetting and printing more copies again would fill an immediate need, but also provides copies that would be needed to complete the volume later on. These really are the only reasons to print in the first place, so it seems probable that Martin reprinted line for line to meet demand. Thus, we learn two things: the value of the somewhat out-of-date materials in the Philosophical Transactions to readers — this isn't the newspaper — and the absence of marketing things as new and improved when they're basically the same. This isn't a popular poem or a normal revised history. These hints help us toward a broader question. What genre would contemporary readers have expected the Transactions to be situated in? I follow J. Paul Hunter in thinking features set expectations for readers, but I expand beyond title pages. We know how the Philosophical Transactions were marketed based on the features we've discussed. They were reading materials of lasting interest, but whose everyday price of 6 pence and quick continuation after a disaster suggest an immediate audience. They could be read pleasurably as they came out, or reread after a period of years. The term catalogs class them as miscellanies, along with improving literature like Moxon, collections of entertaining materials, and collected works, although later on they might be under history of the natural sort. At this point, they were more like occasional poems or pamphlets that someone seriously seeking to understand might collect in bound volumes. Indeed, This is obvious enough again from the price, 6 pence, binding, stab-stitched, and the title page that gets right to the topics under consideration. It's hard to imagine the after your Nobel Prize Royal Society and the better than nature or science transactions of today starting as entertaining pamphlets, but that's the problem with originating genres. They look backwards, not forwards, combining genres that exist before them. But this talk is also about methodology, and I've unostentatiously demonstrated some new approaches for bibliography that you should be able to use in your own research. I'd like to turn to method for a moment. First, fingerprinting is pretty good, but not perfect. As it was originally intended, it can be used to identify materials needing further investigation, but alone it is not sufficient to prove much. Yet, it's so easy to do, even for digital materials, that I think scholars working with older printed materials should do it routinely, and students should be taught how to do it as part of basic research. Think of how many hidden editions and how much contextual marketing information we could uncover if a fingerprint were, say, a standard part of a citation. Second, optical collation is great, but time-consuming and so best done when you already know where to look. Also, Hinman collators are large, expensive, no longer manufactured machines and require 2 copies in the same room. Who keeps 2 copies of a long serial run when most won't keep 1? Other collators are slightly better. David Gantz has used Halley's Comet with a laptop, but I've got one slightly better in terms of portability. For this research, I developed an app that uses these little computers that we carry around in our pockets, Pocket Hinman, which you can download right now. I designed this for working scholars who need something easily accessible at home, abroad, while traveling, in bookshops, or really anywhere else. I've used it on 2 continents and dozens of rare book rooms, bookshops, and living rooms. It draws on a concept from David Vandermeulen's 1988 article about the benefits of low-tech tools. High among those benefits is that they're accessible to scholars of all stripes. While the LiDAR-enabled iPhone is hardly low-tech, Apple has so captured us that an advanced pocket computer is now quite accessible. Perhaps some of you are checking yours right now while you download Pocket Hinman. Thirdly, rather than using the standard quasi-facsimile transcription that Fredson Bowers refined, I transcribed the typographical sorts that the compositor laid out. I talk more about this in a forthcoming chapter with Brill, for those who want more, but no one has done this to the degree that I have. Peter Bellany comes close, but only for titles and not for spacing matter. Indeed, normal ASCII and Unicode, or even MUFI, cannot capture historical typography with the detail that we've discussed today. So I've begun designing a type-faced and text system, let's call it a digital philological typewriter, to do the work. How it works takes more time than I have and would stretch the patience of all but the most bibliographical of digital humanists, but I invite you to look and would love to hear from you if these keywords resonate. Emacs, custom typo mode and YAS, Markdown, Contech, custom CSL, Pandoc, open type features, custom glyphs, and makefiles. So, I've shown both new methods for bibliography and what those methods can attain, while contributing to a deeper understanding of everyday reading material in slightly extending Hunter's conception of the features that signal genre. If we acknowledge that books are the natural product of living creatures going about their business, then studying them is natural history, and today I think I've focused on both taxonomy and optics. What I show isn't a microscope, but shares its capacity to extend our sense ratios. How this reading material begins to secularize hermeneutics into poetics is a discussion for another day. Thanks for listening.